close your eyes. Imagine a dog. Its nose is wet. Its nostrils are flaring. It can smell a single drop of blood from a mile away. Or so the stories say. Now imagine yourself. Your nose is just there, in the middle of your face. Mostly useless, except for detecting smoke or spoiled milk. That is the story we all grew up with. Humans barely smell anything. That story is one of the most successful myths in all of biology. It has been repeated in classrooms, documentaries, and dinner conversations for nearly 150 years. And it is almost entirely wrong. Here is the strange thing. The belief that humans have a poor sense of smell did not come from experiments. It came from one 19th century anatomist's guess about the size of a brain structure. It was published as an opinion, repeated as a fact, and never seriously tested for more than a century. When scientists finally did test human smell, they found something that should have embarrassed everyone who ever repeated the myth. Humans are actually excellent smellers. We can track a scent across a field the way a tracking dog does. We can distinguish an enormous number of odors, far more than anyone believed possible. We process smell through one of the richest sensory systems in the brain, wired directly into the centers of memory and emotion. The human nose is not a downgrade. It is a precision instrument that we have been told to ignore. This is the story of the biggest lie ever told about the human body. And it starts with a man who never ran a single smell test. The year is 1879. The place is Paris. The anatomist is Paul Broca, one of the most famous brain scientists in history. Broca is studying the human brain. The olfactory bulb, the structure at the front of the brain that receives smell information from the nose, is relatively small in humans compared to the size of our brain. In dogs, the olfactory bulb is relatively larger. Broca makes an inference because humans have a small olfactory bulb, and because humans have free will, the small bulb must mean humans do not rely on smell. He divides mammals into two categories: macrosmatics, meaning big smellers, and microsmatics, meaning small smellers. Humans, he declares, are microsmatics. Here is what makes this moment so important. Broca did not test anyone's sense of smell. He did not measure how many odors a human could detect. He did not compare human and dog performance on any task. He looked at the relative size of one brain structure, made an assumption about what that size meant, and published it. There was no data behind the claim. There was only inference. And yet the claim spread. Broca was famous. His framework was tidy, and the idea that humans were smell-blind fit nicely with the human self-image of the time. We were the thinking species, the visual species, the ones who rose above our animal senses. The label microsmatics stuck. It moved from Broca's papers into textbooks, and from textbooks into the common understanding of the body. For the next 130 years, scientists repeated it without checking it. The myth even got a name in science, the microsmatic myth, and in 2017, one scientist decided to take it apart in the most prestigious scientific journal in the world. John McGann is a neuroscientist at Rutgers University, and he was tired of reading the same unsupported claim in paper after paper. In May 2017, he published a review in the journal Science with a title that said it all: Poor human olfaction is a 19th century myth. McGann went through the history, the anatomy, and the actual behavioral data. His conclusion was blunt. The idea that humans have a poor sense of smell is not supported by the evidence. It is a mistake that has been repeated for generations. To understand why McGann was so confident, you need to understand what the nose actually does. Inside your nose, high up in the nasal cavity, there is a patch of tissue called the olfactory epithelium. It is about the size of a postage stamp, and it is packed with millions of olfactory receptor neurons. Each of these neurons carries one type of receptor protein on its surface. When a molecule of an odorant drifts into your nose and binds to the right receptor, The neuron fires, sending a signal to the olfactory bulb, and from there to the brain. Here is the part that surprised everyone. The human olfactory bulb, the structure Broca dismissed as too small, is not small in absolute terms. It contains the same basic architecture as the olfactory bulb of a dog, with layers of processing neurons and connections to the rest of the brain. What Broca measured was the size of the bulb relative to the whole brain, and the human brain is enormous, mostly because of the cerebral cortex, which has nothing to do with smell at all. Broca was comparing the size of a kitchen to the size of a mansion and concluding that the kitchen must be unimportant. The kitchen was fine, the mansion was just big. McGann also pointed out that the neuron counts in the human olfactory bulb are comparable to those in animals with supposedly excellent smell. The number of functional olfactory receptor genes in humans is lower than in dogs, roughly 400 versus 800 to 1,000. But the number of receptor genes is not the whole story. What matters is how the brain uses the signals, and the human brain has a surprisingly large and sophisticated olfactory processing system, with connections that run deep into the centers of memory and emotion. You have probably heard another version of this myth, the one that says dogs smell 10,000 times better than humans. That number is also not real. It comes from an old estimate about the size of the dog's olfactory epithelium, the sensory patch inside the nose, which is indeed larger and more folded in dogs than in humans. But the 10,000 times figure was never a measured comparison of performance. When researchers actually put humans and dogs through the same smell tests, the gap is much smaller than the legend suggests. Dogs are better at some things, like tracking a specific scent across a long distance. Humans are better at others, like identifying an odor by name and remembering what it is. The two species have different strengths, not different leagues. There is even something special about the human olfactory system that dogs do not have. Your olfactory receptor neurons, the nerve cells in your nose that detect odor molecules, are replaced throughout your life. They are one of the few populations of neurons in the adult nervous system that regenerate continuously. When an olfactory neuron wears out or gets damaged, a stem cell in the nasal lining makes a new one and wires it into the brain. You have been rebuilding your sense of smell your whole life without noticing. No other major sense does this. It is a sign that your nose is not a leftover. It is a maintained, expensive, actively renewed system. The behavioral evidence backs this up, and it is more dramatic than anyone expected. In 2017, the same year McGann published his review, a group of researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, led by Lucia Jacobs, published a study that became famous. They asked a simple question: can humans track a scent the way a dog does? They took a group of people, blindfolded them, and had them follow a chocolate scent trail laid across a grassy field, on their hands and knees, using only their noses. The results were clear. The blindfolded humans succeeded. They followed the scent trail across the field, zigzagging and correcting their course, in the same pattern that tracking dogs use. They even used the same trick that dogs use, sampling more air through one nostril than the other, comparing the signals like a stereo system, comparing two channels. These were not professional trackers. These were ordinary people who had been blindfolded and told to follow their noses, and they did it. The study was a direct behavioral refutation of the microsmatic myth. Humans can track a scent across open ground with their eyes closed. That is not the behavior of an animal with a poor sense of smell. That is the behavior of an animal with a serious olfactory system. There is an even more humbling number. Some researchers have estimated that humans can discriminate among at least 1 trillion different odors. That number comes from a 2014 study published in Science, and while it has been debated, even the most conservative estimates put human odor discrimination in the hundreds of thousands or millions. Far from being a barely functioning nose, the human olfactory system is capable of extraordinary discrimination. Think about what 1 trillion means. It means that your nose right now is capable of telling apart more odors than there are stars in our galaxy. It means that the perfume industry, the wine industry, the coffee industry, and the world of cooking all depend on a sense that we have been told is weak. The people who can tell you the vintage of a wine, the region of a coffee bean, or the exact spice missing from a dish are not freaks of nature. They are people who learn to use an instrument that everyone else was told was broken. The experts who work with smell are living proof of how trainable the human nose is. Perfumers can identify hundreds of individual fragrance notes by name. Sommeliers can blind taste a wine and name the grape, the region, and the vintage. These skills are not genetic gifts reserved for a lucky few. They are the product of thousands of hours of practice. Studies of smell training show that ordinary people can dramatically improve their odor discrimination with a few weeks of focused practice. The instrument was never weak. It was just never given a workout. There is a link between smell and taste that makes the whole story even more consequential. When you eat, most of what you call flavor is actually smell. Your tongue detects 5 basic tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. Everything else, the raspberry, the vanilla, the garlic, the smokiness, the earthiness, comes from odor molecules traveling up the back of your throat into your nose. If you hold your nose while eating, food becomes flat and dull. That is why people with colds say food tastes like nothing. Their tongue is fine. Their nose is blocked. Up to 80% of what we call taste is actually smell. A species with a poor sense of smell would not have built entire cuisines around it. We built cuisines because our noses are good. The connection between smell and memory is one of the strangest and most beautiful parts of this story. Smell is the only one of your 5 senses that is wired directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, the brain centers for emotion and memory. Every other sense, vision, hearing, touch, taste, routes its signals through the thalamus first, like a message passing through a switchboard. Smell bypasses the switchboard. It goes straight to the emotional core of the brain. That is why a single smell can transport you back decades. The smell of your grandmother's kitchen, of rain on dry earth, of a particular brand of soap, can flood you with memories and feelings that a photograph never could. The scientific name for this is the Proust effect, named after the writer Marcel Proust, who described exactly this experience in his novel, In Search of Lost Time. A Madeleine dipped in tea opened an entire world of memory. Proust was not being poetic. He was describing the anatomy of his own brain. If smell is so powerful, why is losing it such a serious problem? Because the same wiring that makes smell so tied to memory also makes it a window into brain health. Loss of smell, called anosmia, is one of the earliest signs of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. Some researchers believe that a simple smell test could one day be a routine screening tool for neurodegenerative disease. The sense we dismissed as unimportant is one of the first systems to fail when the brain starts to go. The COVID-19 pandemic made this concrete for millions of people. One of the most distinctive symptoms of the virus was sudden smell loss. Overnight, people who had never thought about their sense of smell could not smell coffee, could not smell food, could not smell the people they loved. The sudden loss was terrifying, and for many, it did not fully recover. The pandemic turned the invisible sense into a topic of worldwide conversation. People started paying attention to their noses for the first time in their lives, and what they found was that losing smell is not a minor inconvenience. It is a deep loss. There is a social side to smell that most people never think about, and it shows how much information your nose is quietly collecting. In a famous 1995 study, a biologist named Klaus Wedekind at the University of Bern asked women to smell t-shirts worn by men they had never met. The women consistently preferred the smell of men whose immune genes, the MHC genes, were different from their own. The result, which has been replicated in various forms, suggests that human smell carries information about genetic compatibility, and that the nose plays a quiet role in partner choice. You are not consciously aware of doing this. Your nose is doing it for you, in the background. Every time you meet someone new, smell is also linked to the perception of age, health, and even fear. Researchers have found that people can estimate another person's age from their body odor, that sickness changes the way a person smells, and that the smell of fear, collected from the sweat of frightened people, changes how others react. The human nose reads a constant stream of social information that never reaches conscious awareness. It is a silent conversation running underneath every interaction you have ever had. Here is the question that should have been asked 150 years ago. Why did anyone believe the myth in the first place? Part of the answer is that we are visual animals, and we tend to judge other senses by visual standards. We think of the world as something we see, so we assume that any sense we do not consciously use must be weak, but the nose works differently from the eye. Smell is processed mostly unconsciously. Your brain is reading the chemical world around you constantly, but it only raises the information to conscious awareness when it matters. You do not notice your nose working because it is designed not to be noticed. It is running in the background like an operating system you never see. There is a name for this kind of background processing in science. It is called implicit processing. The information is real, it is detailed, and it shapes your behavior. But you never see the steps. Smell is the most implicit of all the senses, which made it the easiest one to dismiss. Just because you are not aware of your nose working does not mean it is idle. The ancestors of all mammals relied on smell for survival. Smell tells an animal where food is, where danger is, who is friend, and who is stranger, who is healthy, and who is sick. For most of mammalian history, the nose was the primary sense. Our distant ancestors, the first mammals, were small, nocturnal creatures that lived in the shadow of the dinosaurs. They survived by their noses, sniffing out insects and avoiding predators in the dark. The human nose is the descendant of that survival equipment. The genetic record makes the point even more directly. Olfactory receptor genes form one of the largest gene families in the mammalian genome. In humans, the family has been mapped in detail, and it numbers roughly 900 genes, of which about 400 are still functional and the rest are silent copies. This is a classic evolutionary signature. A gene family this large is either actively used or in the process of being shut down. The human olfactory receptor family is too big, too structured, and too well maintained to be a leftover. It is a working system with a lot of parts. Think about the world through the nose of your ancestors. A human hunter on the savannah could smell a dead animal from a distance and know whether the meat was fresh. They could smell rain coming on the wind. They could smell smoke from a distant fire. They could smell the difference between plants that were safe and plants that were dangerous. None of these skills required a conscious effort. The nose processed the chemical world and handed the brain an answer. That system is still inside you. It has just been buried under a culture that tells you it does not exist. There is even a physical clue in how you breathe. When you are curious, you sniff. Sniffing is not random. It changes the airflow in your nose so that more odor molecules reach the olfactory epithelium. Researchers have shown that the brain actively controls sniffing, that sniffing changes the electrical activity of the olfactory bulb, and that you adjust your sniff volume and rhythm based on what you are trying to smell. Your body treats the nose as an instrument to be aimed. That is not the behavior of a vestigial sense. That is the behavior of a working sense that knows what it is for. We tend to think of evolution as a story of upgrades. We lost fur, we gained brains. We lost smell, we gained vision. But the smell story shows that evolution does not always work that way. Humans did not lose their sense of smell. They kept it, maintained it, and built a brain around it that is wired for scent at the deepest level. We are not microsmatic. We are macrosmatic, in our own way, with a sense of smell that is specialized for the kind of information that matters to us. The myth of the weak human nose is one of the most persistent errors in science. And it survived so long for a simple reason: nobody tested it. It is a reminder that a confident claim, repeated often enough, can pass for fact, even when it has no evidence behind it. And it is a reminder that the human body is full of abilities that we have been taught to dismiss. Next time you walk into a room where bread is baking, or rain is about to fall, or a familiar perfume hangs in the air, pause for a second. Your nose is doing something extraordinary. It is decoding the chemistry of the world, comparing it against a lifetime of stored memories, and handing you the result as a feeling before you even know why. That is not a weak sense. That is a sense that never needed your attention to be brilliant. So here is what you should know the next time someone tells you that humans have a terrible sense of smell. It is not true. It was never true. It was a guess, made in 1879, by a man who never smelled a single test. Your nose is not the weak link in your body. It is one of the most sophisticated chemical detectors on Earth, wired straight into your memory and your emotions, capable of tracking a scent across a field and distinguishing more odors than you could count in a lifetime. The dog smells better than you because the dog never stopped trying. Your nose is not the problem. Your attention is, start smelling the world again.